Today on the show, we're talking with Deirdre Tshien from Capsho. She's got a Because of My Podcast story, a marketing strategy, and wait till you hear about Capsho 2.0. Hit it, ladies.
The School of Podcasting with Dave Jackson.
Podcasting since 2005. I am your award-winning Hall of Fame podcast coach, Dave Jackson. Thanking you so much for tuning in. If you're new to the show, welcome aboard. This is where I help you plan, launch, grow, and if you want to, monetize your podcast. My website is schoolofpodcasting.com. If you slap on a /listener to the end of that, that will save on either a monthly or yearly subscription. And of course, that comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. And today I wanted to start off with a quick news item. And that is, in the past, I've talked about an app I use called Volley. It's really great for coaching, and I've loved it except for one thing, and that was it was free. I talked and interviewed the founder, and they did have a business strategy, but like many free programs, it's going out of business April 30th. I have switched to Zip Message. So if you're a member of the School of Podcasting and haven't been around the Facebook group lately, you're going to see more about that. But I do want to point out that once again, and Josh was the guy that said, look, there are a lot of companies that charge for their service that go out of business, and that is true as well. But I've also seen more things that don't charge enough. And I've talked about this in my newsletter. If you go out to Podcasting Observations, for me, I think what they did is they created a really good product and lots of support. It was so good. But the problem was they said, okay, the features we have now, you'll always have for free. And then they created some extra features that they charged for. And the bad news was the free one was so good, I kind of didn't need the paid version. And apparently I was not alone. So I'll have a link out at schoolofpodcasting.com/872. If you want to check out Zip Message, that's what I am moving to. And today we've got a really cool, it's all in one. We're talking with Deirdre from Capsho. And as we listen to her, you'll hear a Because of My Podcast story. We're going to hear about Capsho 2.0 is now out. And this is an artificial intelligence that you upload your episode and it then transcribes it. It really does everything but your laundry. And we'll get to that right after this.
Yeah.
Deirdre is the CEO and co-founder of Capsho, and today we're going to talk about dealing with the mental part of having competition. We're going to sniff AI a little bit, and we're going to talk about how she used dripping to build Capsho. But let's start there first. What the heck is Capsho?
Capsho is an AI-powered podcast content writer, which is the fastest way to market and grow your podcast organically. And so what we do is you upload your audio file and now in 2.0 is video file too. So audio and video file. And in under 10 minutes, it will create a first draft of your title, description, your podcast website content, social media captions, email, blog post, LinkedIn article, YouTube description, and it'll pull out quotes for you as well as a full transcript. We're here to really help you amplify your voice and your message. That's what Capsho is designed for. And so, if anyone asks us to go back to almost, I'm keep circling back, but to that original thing around ChatGPT and all of that, I get asked a lot, how are you different? A, it's the process, but also B, we're a specialist AI in the sense of all of the content that we create or Capsho creates for you is anchored in your content, in your voice, in your message. It doesn't pull from the World Wide Web and just make stuff up, which is what general AIs will do because that's what they have to do. They don't have anything else to anchor it in, but we anchor it in your voice. So that's what we do. We help you amplify your voice and your message.
So Capsho was the first mover in this AI transcription marketing material creation tool. And then this little thing you may have heard of because, the world can't stop talking about ChatGPT came along. And we'll talk about if that knocked her off balance a little bit. But as my mom used to say, to make a shadow, you first need a light. And I thought it was interesting that Deirdre found the light when ChatGPT came on the scene.
And so I was really excited when it burst into the scene. And particularly why I was so excited was because I was like, awesome. I don't have to battle with those headwinds of people not knowing what AI is anymore. It's become mainstream. You know what I mean? So it just makes it that much simpler for us to just get on and do what we're there to do.
So there she is basking in the light. Hey, this is great. We've got a partner now in educating people on AI. And then she went to a party.
I was just having this really lovely conversation with this really lovely woman. And the next minute she kind of turns around and she like pats me on the shoulder. She's just like, there. And I'm like, what? Like, why? What's going on? She's like, we all get competition. And I was like, what?
And Deirdre kind of jokes about this, that it was about 2 days that she kind of went into a little bit of a tizzy, and it felt like about, 2 years. But in the end, she came to realize,
I came out of those 2 days of, rocking myself in the corner, thinking like, what's going to happen? I came out of that with like absolute clarity on who it is that we serve, and, what it is that we do.
And by better understanding who her audience is, she realized that's really not competition.
To say that I'm not feeling, that I don't feel particular things is also like, I'm not one of those people who's like, I'm going to strut around and be like, I'm invincible, because we're not. But we do have a particular type of person that we serve that is very different to the person that, ChatGPT is going to attract. We focus on entrepreneurs who podcast, time poor, people who do not want to try to figure out how to prompt ChatGPT and what to ask it. And, I have to get my transcript here and I have to do this thing with it. And, like they just don't want to deal with that. It's like, you guys just do all of that. They know that what we have built and the way that we have built it is for marketing, because we are marketers fundamentally. So it is a content marketing platform. And they just have to make their, tweaks here and there. And that's it. They don't have to do anything else. And so that's kind of, that's what I came out of that knowing with 100% clarity.
And so she focused on her audience and listened to what they wanted. And then they came out with Capsho 2.0. And
I guess the crown jewel, the basis of it is this HumAIne editor, where it gives the humans, the creators, the full control and flexibility around what it is that they want to create. So for those of you who have used Capsho 1.0, and I know, Dave, you've kind of given me some of this feedback as well, you could tell that it's very structured. It, time and time again, it gives you back the thing in a very structured way, in the same template, let's say. That is software with AI, right? But we were like, well, how do we actually give the human the reins? How do we give the creator the reins? And so that is why we have the HumAIne editor, which is you can drag and drop. It's totally customizable. All of the blocks you can move around. So for example, Dave, I know that you really love doing these summary, like these paragraph summarized things in your descriptions. You can now do that inside of Capsho 2.0. You couldn't before in Capsho 1.0. So it's going to be the way that you interact with Capsho is going to completely be up leveled. The quality of the outputs and what you get is completely up leveled, and you can save all the templates. You can share. There is a School of Podcasting template as well inside of Capsho that anyone listening to this can also use. So we are also really crowdsourcing from experts in the podcasting space. What are their best practice templates? We're putting that into Capsho. So there is a really, really solid starting point for anyone trying to create any of their content.
So there are going to be other podcasters that do shows like yours, and you can look at them as competition and freak out, or you can do kind of what Deirdre did.
Obviously, I've heard about, because people will be like, have you heard about this, new thing?
Yeah.
And so we've heard about them, of course. We just focus on what it is that we're doing. Like as I said before, we know who we're serving. We have so many of them that are like, I feel so grateful that we do have a really engaged user base. Our Capshovians are amazing. They're not shy about giving us feedback, which is great because we then know what it is that they want. So listening to them all the time is actually what makes us better. It's not listening to our competition because, they had to start from somewhere, whether that was, hey, let's see what, say, a Capsho or something else is doing. And that's our starting point, it doesn't make sense for that to be our starting point, if that makes sense, because then we're really looking backwards rather than looking forwards.
So when in doubt, focus on your audience, figure out what they want, and give it to them. But again, there's always a bright side to look at when something that might be seen as a problem comes on board.
And it's validating in a way as well, because you only really get competitors in the space when they look at you and they're like, oh, these guys are doing something that's working. Like, we want a piece of that too. So, it's validating. Does it get under our skin sometimes? So maybe when they try to steal our messaging and things like that, it does. But you know what? You do, we're just always going to do us.
Just be yourself. Great advice. And recently I have tried to make a concerted effort to stop saying the phrase show notes. Why? Because, well, if you're a podcaster, you know what show notes are. It's your episode description, but your listeners may not. So when you say links in the show notes, they might go, what? And so Deirdre and I got into a conversation about show notes, and I asked her what her definition of, did I say show notes? Episode description.
I've always been of the view that the description is there to compel someone to press play. So the title is there to have someone stop and be like, oh, this looks like a topic or something that I'd be interested in listening to. Let me learn a little bit more. And your description is designed to be like, how do we hook them? How do we create that curiosity to actually have someone listen? Our descriptions are really very short. It's like literally it creates curiosity. And then if people want to learn more and they want to press play, listen to it. But if they're more of a reading type, then go to the podcast website content, because that's where I go into more detail about, what we're going to be talking about, things like that. This is my view, obviously, is that the description, I don't want to give too much away because I do want people to listen. So that's always been my view. But again, and that was what 1.0 was built on. But also I know now that, shouldn't be everyone's views. I shouldn't be ramming that down everyone's throats. So that's why we have completely opened it up and made it fully customizable. So you can give it all away if you'd like to in your description. We're not going to stop you.
Deirdre's going to explain a strategy called content dripping, but I asked her about a previous business that she had, and she grew it via, you guessed it, a podcast. So this is because of my podcast story, that's going to lead into a marketing strategy called content dripping.
I'll talk to you about sort of our core strategy, which I call content dripping, which is really what Capsho was built on. And this kind of goes back to, 2 to 3 years ago when it was when I started my first podcast actually. And I did that because I had a coaching business. So at the time we had an agency business, that was doing digital marketing for e-commerce business owners. And then we transitioned that into a coaching business. And, it was one of those things, I'm sure you know, Dave, when we launched something, we're like, yes, everyone's going to want this. We're going to be successful. It's going to be great. And then, reality hits and no one cares and no one seems to want it or anything like that. So when I was like, how are we going to get the word out there about this coaching business? And one of my mentors was like, you've got to start a podcast. Like, a podcast is the best way for one, to find your voice, but two, to also, create content that actually helps you get the word out there. So I was like, okay, cool. Yes, a podcast is going to be the answer to all of, it's going to answer everything.
Money will fall from heaven.
Exactly. Yeah. Just because I recorded something and I put it out there.
And like all podcasters discover eventually, you're not going to get that first customer on day one or week one. In fact, it can take months and in some cases years, depending on your circumstances. And I asked Dee, I'm like, why didn't you quit?
I'm not going to lie. It was definitely I was very close. I think I was in a particular position where I kind of didn't know if I did quit, what would my next
what's the next thing
be? Yeah. So it was like, okay, well, I can either kind of do nothing or try to figure it out, or I could just keep going with this and maybe along the way I'll figure it out anyway, if this isn't the thing that I'm meant to do.
And how was she feeling about that time?
And so first of all, I had to have that conversation with myself, which is, is podcasting the thing? And when I asked myself, well, if it's not podcasting, what is it? How else am I going to become known as an expert in my space? I was like, well, there's not like, it has to be podcasting. So I decided to go all in. I was like, I'm not going to give it up. I'm not going to be one of those statistics of, the people who pod fade. I'm going to go at it. I'm going to figure this thing out. And so, I was like, okay, there's this thing called SEO, which I was like, I don't want to figure that thing out. It's just way too overwhelming.
It's another really big book to read. Yes.
But, I had to put my big girl pants on and figure some of that out. And so I did. And there's this thing called an email list, which I also had to figure out. And, so there were all of these elements, on top of social media that I was like, wow, there's a lot that I have to figure out. And there's a lot. And I mean, I did, not perfectly, obviously, but I started figuring out, how powerful things like a blog post can be. And I started, and how it can be found, on search, and even like things like a podcast website content, which I didn't have to begin with when I first launched my show, and started getting really, really overwhelmed, to the point where, gosh, I had people who were helping to support, me, and we were all burning out.
I'll put a link to the episode about overwhelm. It's schoolofpodcasting.com/871. I'll have a link in the episode description, but you kind of feel like this when you're overwhelmed.
It doesn't feel like anything's working. What are we doing? Right. And then, I remember it was like months in. So it was September 2020. So that would have been, 6 to 7 months after we launched. I finally got a ding on my Stripe account. And it was actually the third time that I'd launched our coaching offer. And then I was like, oh my gosh, people are paying me us money. Like finally, what's going on? And so I hop on a call with, my new clients, and I'm like, first of all, best decision that you've made. Yeah. And also just asking for a friend, but how did you find out about us? So, and they were like, well, we've listened to your podcast. Wow, that's awesome. So, what made you decide to invest was like, well, I've been following it. You give so much value that I felt guilty for not paying you. I was like, wow, that is so powerful. And then when I was like, okay, well, how did you find out about my podcast? They were like, some of them were like, I can't quite remember. And that's always a good sign, because then you're kind of like the places where you need to be.
Yeah.
But a lot of them were like, I just Googled something and something of yours came up.
And this is why I say I'm not anti-advertising, but the number one way, the most profitable way to make money with your podcast is to use it as a marketing arm for your business.
Oh, and by the way, just to close that, so that first month, September 2020, that was, we did over 25,000 that month. And in that first year, even with like those big fat zeros, we ended up doing over 223,000 in that coaching business, just off the back of having figured this and just sticking with it, just sticking with what it is that we were doing.
And what again was she doing? Figuring out who her audience is, that is so important, and finding out what they want and giving it to them. And so she has a term for this. It's called content dripping.
It is basically a system that is designed to get you discovered, get you played, build your audience, and keep them, retain them. And there's two parts to content dripping, which I call trap and delight. We want to trap with what we call content honey traps. So again, going back to our discussion about the description, when I'm like, it's all about creating that curiosity. It's all about how do you just compel someone to do the next thing that you want them to do. Like when you think about any journey that you're trying to take a potential client or customer on, what you're trying to do is just get them to do the next thing. Like even when you think about email, like the email subject line, literally the only thing that you're trying to do with the email subject line is to get them to open it. And literally the only thing you're trying to do with like the first paragraph is to get them to keep it, like that's, if you really chunk it down, like that's really how we create copy is you need to trap them. Content honey, it's in a nice way. We're trapping in a delightful way. And then we do delight them, which is with the rest of our content. So once they're in our world, how do we keep giving and giving and giving so much value that they feel guilty for not paying? Our content dripping strategy is all, and how Capsho is built is anchored in trapping and delighting.
So when it comes to delighting, how much do you give away?
I give everything away for free, as in from a knowledge perspective. So I'm pretty much an open book on that. So I can guarantee you that like 80% of what it is that you say, even if you give it all away, will not be implemented. Like it just will not. People have all the intentions in a session or in a webinar. People will be like, yes, I'm going to do this thing. And I've taken all these notes. Guaranteed 8 out of 10 of them, probably even 9 out of 10 of them will not actually go through with it. And so, that's why they will always need to pay for something. Then they will always need to pay for what it is that you have to offer, because you can actually help guide them. You can actually, give them the step by step. You can actually, really get into the how, into the nitty gritty, and hold them accountable to actually implement. So that's why I'll give everything away, because people we're human. We're just not going to implement all the things that we think we're going to. We do need the help.
So what does content dripping look like in real life?
The podcast is the center of all of my content. I, record my podcast episode, and that's like the first thing that goes live, say on a Tuesday. And I have a promotional email, and I do a social media post about it. And basically from that, I get my initial listens, when it gets published, get my initial listens, and then it starts to taper off and starts to die down a little bit, sort of a week out. And then that's when I publish my YouTube video that is also based on the podcast content. And so similar thing. And then I talk about that, in different ways. I get, again, spike of, it's similar, like a value content, just positioned a little bit differently and in a different medium, because we all learn differently. And then that dies down a little bit. And then the week after, I drip out my blog post. Again, different medium, similar, anchored in the same content. And then that gets a spike. But all this time, you're just giving. You're giving all of this value, and you're keeping people in your world. And so that is really the basis of, what I call content dripping. That's the basis of what Capsho is built on. And it's their design to get discovered, get listened, and be followed, build your audience.
And if you'd like to take Capsho for a ride, because she just listed a bunch of things and you're like, how am I going to create all that stuff? Well, you guessed it, Capsho. If you want to get started, is there a free trial?
Yes. So you can try an episode for free, and give it a go, see what it's about. I'm really excited about 2.0 and the power behind it. So definitely try it.
And I will have links out in the episode description. It's hard not to say show notes at schoolofpodcasting.com/873. Deirdre, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. You're a blast. I do call you a grumpy old man, but you're really not.
Thank you, I think. She's always fun to hang out with. And the thing that jumped out of me of that is, I think if you're a coach, every single coach should have a podcast. Why, Dave? Oh, why? Because if you go to make a point and you can explain that with some sort of personal story, they get to know you. When you deliver good content, they like you. When you do it on a regular basis, they trust you. Know, like, and trust. That is the key. And so I wanted to bring that up. That jumped out at me, and that's kind of what she was talking about there with when she was trying to grow her business. And I love the fact, like, okay, if it's not a podcast, how am I going to get the word out? And I was like, that's a really good question. Besides, I don't know, writing your name in the sky, things of that nature. And the other thing I wanted to point out was competition. And to make a long story short, I'm playing with a bunch of new apps. Right now, I'm using Cast-O-Matic as my main thing. And if you're a regular listener to the show, you're like, what happened to Overcast? Overcast has said we're never going to embrace the streaming Satoshi thing. And so I started playing with Cast-O-Matic, which if you're an Overcast fan, try that. I've tried Podverse. I've tried Fountain. I just downloaded Pocket Cast and was kind of disappointed. I guess they're in the process of updating that app for the whole podcasting 2.0 value for value thing, but it's not there yet. But in the process of doing this, you can export your current subscriptions from one app to the other in most cases. And I hit a snag, so I had to go back to an old app. And to make a long story short, there were a lot of podcasts that I used to listen to and had kind of forgotten about. And maybe that's why they quit, because, they quit. There are a lot of podcasts I used to listen to that in 2021 and 2022 quit putting out content. And I say this because in the same way that somebody 3 years ago had maybe some little, 14-year-old is like, I'm going to go out for the football team and I want to be a quarterback. And then he saw Tom Brady play. He's like, I'm never going to be as good as Tom Brady. Well, guess what? That guy finally retired again. And I think it's going to stick. And that little 14-year-old kid might be Tom Brady when he grows up. And so if you're thinking of starting a podcast, and unless it's going to be called Thinking Outside the Box, because there are about, and I'm not making this up, somewhere between 20 and 30 shows called Thinking Outside the Box. So maybe come up with a better name. But there may be what looks like to be competition. So number one, click on those shows and see when the last episode was, because a lot of times you'll go, wow, they haven't put out an episode since 2019. So keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that they may have a great show that they've been doing for however many years, and they're kind of getting tired of it. Or maybe they, have the great joy of having a child, and then you figure out that they're so selfish. It's all about them. Feed me, wipe my butt. You're like, well, look, but they do take up a lot of time. Now, there's a lot of reward there, but nonetheless, that podcast may take, and in theory should take, the back seat to taking care of your family. So if there are people that you're like, oh boy, this seems kind of crowded, it might seem a little crowded now, and then all of a sudden you blink and you're like, hey, where'd everybody go? So in the same way that Deirdre talked about it, what do? Don't focus on your competition. Focus on your audience and give them what they want, and you will build that loyal, engaged audience. I mentioned I've been playing with different apps. I'm testing out those apps that are value for value enabled. You can find them at podcastapps.com. You often hear me talk about boosting the show. That's kind of where that comes into play. And those kind of things, not only value for value stuff, but we are talking about the future of podcasting. It's myself and Daniel J. Lewis. You can find it at futureofpodcasting.net. In fact, if you want to set up your show to receive streaming crypto, there is a video right on the front. It takes all of maybe 5 minutes. You can find that at futureofpodcasting.net. Coming in a future episode, I bought the Rode NT1 5th generation microphone. It slices, it dices, it even juliennes, but it is a condenser. And I'm like, So I bought one because I've had a few people talk about it. It's got 32-bit floating. Yeah, that's what that basically means, is you can scream as loud as you want into the microphone and it won't distort. But I'm like, are there people that want to scream as loud as they can into the microphone? Because I typically don't think the neighbors would appreciate that. But we're going to be talking about that in the future. And of course, anything else you would like me to talk about, you can go out to schoolofpodcasting.com. You'll see my contact information there. You'll see where you can sign up for my newsletter. You can see where you can go to my affiliates page. It's all there on one website where you can also subscribe and join the School of Podcasting. That's right, schoolofpodcasting.com. Thanks so much for listening. Until next week, take care. God bless. Class is dismissed.
They say that imitation is the best form of flattery, and I'm feeling very flattered right now.
So that HumAIne feature that they added, it's HumAIne with main spelled AI. Look, I see what you did there. All right.
It takes a second, but
yeah, works good in audio.
Yeah.
And if you're a person that is worried about making a mistake, listen to what happened when they opened up Capsho for the first time.
Who still remember when we launched? It was like we had this like massive wait list, and people were, kept asking us, when are you launching? And we're like, okay, we're racing. Finally, it's like, we launch. And then no one could log in.